Welcome to the Art of Gracious Living. We're going to be doing another read-through of the Popeye magazine, which is a Japanese men's fashion magazine, which has been around for 50 years. This is their 50th anniversary, and this is one of their several 50th anniversary issues. It's the whole City Boy catalog. City Boy is the aesthetic that Popeye coined to refer to sort of an urban prep lifestyle, attitude, and fashion sense. So, this is obviously a takeoff on the whole Earth catalog of the 70s, which was a famous compendium of sort of hippie aesthetic, back to the land, heritage stuff, really very fundamental to the whole heritage, buy it for life, make it work, make do lifestyle. Popeye, in titling their magazine this way, is obviously trying to replicate the idea that this is a comprehensive look at their philosophy and aesthetic. So let's take a look inside and see what we can find. Speedmaster ad, love it, great watch. Moncler, guy who ironically looks like that hat is too young for him, even though he's in his early 20s. Not a great look. Bubblegum doesn't help either. Here are some old issues of Popeye, appropriate for their 50th anniversary issue, looking at some of their spin-offs, the Made in USA catalog. Popeye, from its very beginning in this whole city boy aesthetic, has been very American-oriented. They based their fashion aesthetic on sort of preppy West Coast circa 1975, which was the year the magazine started. Blue puffer vest, that's the perfect color and the perfect style. Very preppy, very 70s, and very in style right now. Popeye cartoon, which is obviously the inspiration for the title. I think it was a bit of a pun that the style makes your eyes pop, and also that Popeye himself is sort of an icon of the strong, rugged individualist. A little essay about the polo shirt and how the polo shirt really was one of the original inspirations for the magazine. One of the founding editors talks about in this article how when the idea of a fashion magazine focused on the American fashion was first floated, first words out of his mouth were tennis shirt. And obviously the original tennis shirt is the Lacoste shirt, not Ralph Lauren's cheap imitation of it. I'm not a big fan of the Ralph Lauren so-called polo shirt. It's a misnomer anyway, because as anybody who's looked at Brooks Brothers advertising over the last 50 years at any time knows, the original, quote, polo shirt was the Oxford cloth button-down shirt. And the button-down collar was so that your collar didn't flap around while you were on a horse playing polo. So to call a copy of the Lacoste shirt a polo shirt is just, as a matter of terminology, ridiculous. And for some reason, Ralph Lauren, with his marketing genius, was able to completely dominate the market of this kind of clothing. He was helped a lot by the fact that Izod did not do a great job of caring for the licensing of the brand, and way overexposed the brand and did far too many kind of cheesy licensing deals. It was great that the brand was reacquired by a French family that founded it back in the early 2000s and brought the brand upscale again and really did miracles. I think shirts are very on point style-wise these days, and it's really the only kind of tennis shirt of that type that I would wear, other than just an unbranded one without a logo. And really the best ones, Sunspiel, just they don't have a logo at all. The quality of the shirt speaks for itself. Here are some of their core go-to items of clothing. These are topsiders, if you read the caption. And these are topsiders too, the white and the blue. They consider the white to be kind of an East Coast aesthetic and the blue to be kind of a West Coast aesthetic. Oxford cloth button down, chino pants, These are a pair of black desert boots, and for some reason they still love that duffel coat. I'm not a big fan. And of course, the Lacoste shirt. So these are all City Boy, Popeye fundamental building blocks of your wardrobe. Here's some essays on shirts. They take a very studied, granular view of preppy fashion in this magazine. That's pretty typical of the Japanese. They love to analyze everything and break it down to its core essentials. And here they talk about the essence of shirts. This is an interesting little article here about the Irving shirt. And that's something that is unique terminology to the Japanese clothing and fashion world. An Irving shirt is a J-press Oxford cloth button-down. And to the Japanese, the J-press shirt is the original Oxford cloth button-down. Their market penetration in Japan was early and almost complete, far before Brooks Brothers made any inroads in the Japanese fashion market. J-Press was the first Western brand to be licensed in Japan. J-Press has been owned by a Japanese company, the company that licensed the name J-Press since the 80s. They originally licensed the J-Press name in 1975, so J-Press has been a preppy fundamental in Japan far, far more than it has been in the United States. Brooks Brothers obviously dominates in the United States. J-Press has been a nice, niche, small brand focused primarily on New Haven, Connecticut, and Boston, Cambridge markets. They make great stuff. And frankly, their Japanese stewards have done a very, very good job of keeping the brand relevant in the United States, far more so than Brooks Brothers. Slow and steady wins the race. Brooks Brothers is really a shadow of its former self, and I think you could argue that J. Press's best days are ahead of it. The different kinds of collars, an interesting little overview. The regular collar, which I think is coming back into fashion, quite frankly. I like the regular or point collar, sometimes even called the arrow collar, which is a little longer version of the regular collar. I think that without any fusing on the inside, in other words, a very loose, floppy, regular collar shirt is a really great look right now. And I've said that in other videos as well. Button-down collar is always going to be a classic. You don't want them too short. You don't want them too long. You want that Mercer and Sons vintage Brooks Brothers profile with an unfused lining and really no lining of the collar itself. In other words, no stiffeners built in. Open collar as a shirt. These are also called camp shirt collars. They're a great summer look, really, and not meant to be tucked in. Probably your best summer bet. Widespread collars, I think, are out of style. They were very 80s. Small open collar, again, I think they're out of style. And then the stand collar, which is basically no collar at all, which gives you a 19th century look, really a very old-fashioned look. And those can be really nice. Here's a photo spread of some guys wearing various shirts. What's interesting to me about this photo spread is that out of 8 shirts, 6 of them are not button downs. Only 2 of them are button down collars. So that would mean that 3/4 of the stylings that they chose to show on these pages are not the traditional button down shirt. This I think proves my point that the standard collar shirt is coming back, and some pretty wide ones too, like with this guy. Here's some more of the basics. Now they focus on pants. The Japanese really do obsess on pants. The Ralph Lauren, these are of course all chino, khaki pants. Really, they're chinos. Most people just call them khakis, but they're a left-hand twill for the most part, which means that the twill is at an angle. And Polo Ralph Lauren, particularly the RRL line of Ralph Lauren stuff, is the best. I've got a great pair that I've talked about in other videos. Cordings is an interesting brand. That's a British brand. You won't see them in the US. You can find them on eBay, but they're all going to be from UK sellers, and they're super high quality. Very, very highly recommended. The braided belt is very on point these days. I prefer a leather version, a leather woven belt, and not the cloth. This is a cloth woven belt. It's a nice belt, but I prefer the leather. This is an interesting little section here where they talk about the baker pant. And this is yet another Japanese only phrase that's used to refer to what we would call herringbone twill fatigue pants. And they're technically different from fatigue pants. What they call the baker pant is essentially the 1940s U.S. Army utility trousers. And they were for general work duty, kitchen duty, KP, work around the base. They got the name Baker by the Japanese because somehow this was associated with the mess hall and kitchen duty. And so somehow that became the Baker pant. No one in the United States calls it that. That is strictly a Japanese only term. But they're a very cool pant. They're very popular right now. You do see a lot of herringbone twill fatigues, and they're just a great, great pant. Very rugged and not quite as military a look. They kind of straddle that line between heritage workwear, civilian workwear, and military. Now, this is all opposed to the fatigue pant, which is based on the OG 107 utility uniform. It was introduced in 1952 and was phased out in 1989, so that would be solidly Korean War and Vietnam War era. This was standard issue for all soldiers. It was part of their uniform, and it was made out of sateen fabric, actually reverse sateen fabric, which after extensive testing by the U.S. military was found to be the strongest fabric that could be used for military clothing. So everybody knows fatigues. They're olive drab, often quite faded, and getting harder and harder to find the originals. So that is yet another puzzling, unique, highly granular distinction that's being drawn by the Japanese fashionistas. Of course, jeans are fundamental to the city boy aesthetic, as they are also with the heritage looks in the U.S. that we all love. The hoodie, pretty much a fashion standard by now. It was not always the case, and I think, again, it's a look that trends young. I think you'll find a lot of fashion influencers on YouTube take the point of view that really nobody over 30 should wear a hoodie, and I tend to agree. Okay, here's your East Coast, West Coast prep. As I said before, there's an article in here where they talk about the founding of Popeye magazine, and it was really looking towards American West Coast preppy style in 1975. That was the core of their philosophy of fashion, and it was always sort of a beachy prep vibe, which you see here. This is the West Coast look. This is the East Coast look, supposedly. Made in USA, New Balance, great shoes. I've worn out many pairs of this exact shoe made in the USA. I would always purchase them at the Skowhegan, Maine outlet store. They are still made in the USA, a very few. Unfortunately, most of New Balance are made overseas, but the Made in USA line is certainly the premium line. These are very much considered a dad shoe in the US, but the Japanese still like them, and maybe they'll make a comeback. I think they're a great running shoe. More fundamentals, the bean boot, Brooks Brothers Oxford cloth button down. Unfortunately, I recommend look for the vintage. There are a few lines now that have the appropriate collar size, but generally speaking, I think you're better off finding Brooks Brothers Oxford cloth button downs used on eBay. The gray flannel suit, of course, an American fashion icon. I've heard it referred to as the first piece of formal clothing that was invented in the United States. and of course, will forever be associated with Brooks Brothers. Nice little spread on ties. You absolutely should know how to tie a four in hand. This is instructions how to tie a four in hand. That is the appropriate knot for an Oxford cloth button down shirt. Really, for any, I think it's the only knot that you ever really need to use. I'm not a big fan of the wide Windsor, and in fact, they seem to be showing all of these stylings with that four in hand. And of course, getting the dimple is the art. You can see some of these examples here. I like a knit tie, but I like a narrower knit tie. And they have the classic seven-fold tie, which are really the epitome of ties. They're the peak of the tie making craft. This is a seven-fold tie, and this is purple label, made in England, 100% silk. There is no lining in a seven-fold tie. Um, it is simply the fabric folded seven times to be made into a tie. They're supremely thin. They tie like a dream, and they really are just a gorgeous, gorgeous thing. I highly recommend seven-fold ties. And of course, they're a little hard to find. They're expensive, as you can see. But if you can find them, get them, wear them, love them. Here's an old spread showing looks like probably the mid to late 70s from Popeye magazine. You've got the different preppy looks. And again, remember, this is 5 years before Lisa Birnbaum's book, The Preppy Handbook. So the Japanese were studying, perfecting the American prep look way before it became a fashion phenomenon that it was in the 80s. Of course, the classic LL Bean tote, absolutely gone viral these days. They cannot make them fast enough. They literally have backlog of several months. Handmade in the USA in Maine, Lewiston, Maine. This is sort of a sleepy, cheap, chic look. Um, this is their typical layers on layers look. Shirt, sort of a overshirt jacket over a t-shirt. So very layered, very loose. This might be the fashion equivalent of shabby chic. Again, this duffel coat with the toggle buttons. To me, it's just reads far too Paddington Bear. I think it can look cute on women, a young woman, but for men, it will never overcome the stigma of Paddington Bear. So I think it's dead, and hopefully we can put a stake in it. Here's the standoff. Polo, Lacoste. Again, I'm firmly on Team Lacoste. Here's some more. This is sort of their heavy duty. That's their theme to this page. Ruggedness. This is a wonderful sweater that is absolutely on point fashion wise today. It's the Cowichan sweater. This one is made in Canada. It's vintage, and a friend of mine recently knitted one. They're extremely difficult to knit, time consuming. You have to be absolutely meticulous in your counting of stitches, and it's essentially you're embroidering while you knit. You're knitting and embroidering at the same time. This is the classic wolf design. My friend's is the sort of an updated fox design, which is the same as is in a recent, very popular film where the main character wears that sweater throughout the film. And she did a wonderful job on it. And I think these are something to watch for. If you can find them, grab them. Here's their travel look. Again, you see a pattern here of layers on layers on layers. T-shirt base, overshirt unbuttoned, and then sort of a jack shirt jacket on the outside. Again, you've got 3 layers here. And a Madras patchwork Madras scarf, which is kind of interesting. I think Madras is definitely the look for this summer. I'm going to be doing a video on Madras very, very soon. It's kind of a safari look. This is a look that was done by this guy who's a famous hiker in Japan, famous hiker, adventurer, outdoorsman. And these are some of his picks. It's sort of he's going for sort of a safari vibe here. I'm thinking 1980s Banana Republic look. I think one piece, well styled, can work really, really well and can give you kind of an exotic look. I would never wear more than one piece of anything that codes safari. Otherwise, you begin to look like you're cosplaying the Great White Hunter, and that's not a great look for 2026. Safari jackets, again, I think if you style it with other things that don't vibe safari, you could get away with it. Like that would look good with jeans. But as with military clothing, one piece is ironic, two pieces is weirdo, obsessive cosplayer. Those are kind of cool desert boots with that center seam. Not sure how well the official Bikini Inspector t shirt really holds up in today's society. How to build your own moccasins, which is surprisingly easy and would be a kind of a fun little project. And then Timberland. Unfortunately, their boots are made very poorly in China for the most part and are pretty much reviled in the heritage boot ecosystem. I had that exact pair of moccasins at one point back when they were made well. And these are probably special editions made in some kind of collaboration. I think they do a collaboration with Rancourt here in Maine. So they're going to be a special, super high quality for the Japanese market, which you'll often see. And we've skipped a lot of pages because this really is a comprehensive guide. There's page after page of city guides to various neighborhoods in Tokyo and where to eat, museums to go to, et cetera, et cetera. So that is the core of the whole City Boy catalog, Popeye July 2026. If you enjoyed it, please subscribe and like this video and leave comments. If you like this kind of content, please let me know. And if you have any thoughts on any of the styling or any of my comments on the styling, please leave it in the comments to this video. Thanks very much, and we'll see you next week.